Hello, and welcome to our podcast for college Catholics. I'm your host, Father Patrick Wainwright, and today I will be having a guest as a sequel to our previous episode. In the last episode, I spoke about the life of Jesus Christ, and among other things, how he came to do battle to the evil against the evil one, and to free us from sin, free us from the world, and free us from Satan. So I've invited Father Cliff Ermatinger as a guest. He has worked as a spiritual director, retreat master, and lecturer on spirituality for many years. He has a BA from Gonzaga University in philosophy and has his licentiate in theology, in sacred theology, from the Regina Apostolorum Pontifical University in Rome. And he is a full-time priest in the Archdiocese of Milwaukee. Father Ermatinger wrote many books with regard to the spiritual life, the interior combat, and also regarding the fight against the evil one in our life. So some of his books, he wrote many other books, but some of the ones I'd like to highlight for those who are listening, so that you can maybe read them and benefit from them. One is If You Knew the Gift of God. Then another one we're going to talk a little bit about today, titled Common Nonsense, 25 Fallacies About Life Refuted. Another one, St. Therese of Lisieux, Spouse and Victim. Then The Letters from the Desert, The Devil's Role in the Spiritual Life. And the most recent book Father Cliff wrote is The Trouble with Magic. So, how are we doing, Father Cliff? Thank you very much for joining us in our podcast.
Thank you, and thanks for the invitation. How am I doing? Well, I'm doing better since I got here. It's good to be with you and your listeners.
Yeah, thank you for joining us. So, I heard that you used to play rugby.
I did. I'm sure if I even watched a rugby match now, something in me would break. But I played all through college. And the thing was, when I went away to college, even though I knew God was calling me to be a priest, I thought I would put his plan on hold. And I thought, well, I'm going to join the Marine Corps, become a Marine officer. And I thought playing rugby would be a good way towards, having some physical sport.
Building endurance.
Building endurance, exactly. And
absolutely. I used to play rugby too, by the way, when I was in high school.
And I imagine you were a back of some sort.
Almost a runner. Yeah.
Yeah, I was not a runner. I was in the forwards. And I've got the injuries to show it. So it was it was a great sport, a great camaraderie, a lot of fun, a lot of travel. I played all through college, and then
so you played in college. That's pretty competitive.
Yes, and then after college, I played for a year. Even though I knew I was going to join the seminary, I ended up working a year to pay off my college debt. And I was playing for the Chicago Lions, which was...
So that's a semi-professional league, rugby league?
Well, at that time, they called them Super League. I don't know what they call it anymore. But, back then, it was all amateur. There was no professional.
Perfect. Wow, very good. Well, so you were a pretty good player, obviously, to get to that level. So
I don't know about that. It was I was surrounded by a lot of good players.
Very good. Well, it's a team sport. So, it's not enough to have one good player. And do you have any other hobbies, Father? Just to share a little bit of your humanity here with our listeners.
Well, I grew up playing it's called the Great Highland Bagpipe. And I used to compete, and I did my first solo bagpipe competition when I was 14.
Wow, that's amazing.
And I had a bit of a hiatus because of travel and all of this, and it was hard to maintain the instrument. It's like a living organism.
Absolutely. Yeah, you need to keep it up.
You have to constantly play it, and traveling and living in other countries, and this is before the internet existed. You just couldn't order things online because there was no online. And anyway, it was just very cumbersome to try and keep the instrument up. When I got back to the States in 2009, I got back into the pipes and started competing way too early. I was not ready to compete. My fingers were out of shape, but I competed for a number of years until an injury put that in my rearview mirror. And then I thought, ever since I was probably 10 or 11, I enjoyed listening to Baroque strings. I love Baroque strings.
That's awesome.
And so I thought, well, I think maybe if I can't play the bagpipes now, this is my opportunity to try the Baroque cello. So I'm.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. I shouldn't say I play it. I play at it.
Uh-huh.
I don't think I'll ever be a good cellist, but if I could get back to the pipes, and I'm trying now, arthritis is a reality I'm discovering in my fingers. But if I could get back to the pipes, I think I could be a good piper again.
A bagpiper.
Yeah, I hope so. But the cello, that will always be a bit elusive for me.
Okay, very good. Well,
I won't foist that on your audience. I won't. It's not Lent yet, so yeah, we won't play any cello for them.
Okay. Well, we would love to listen to you sometime. If there's some way to have you here playing cello, that would be like pretty awesome. So, would you like to tell us anything, and our listeners, a little bit about your journey as a young man, and how you got to discern the holy priesthood, and how you got to become a writer?
Well, I grew up in kind of a typical Catholic family in Chicago. Our parents, I think, assumed that we were getting the proper catechesis in our schools, and we were not. And they're paying. Right. They were certainly paying for it, but it's really
disappointing.
Well, yes, I mean that's a kind word. We were really not given the content of the faith. We lived in it, though. I mean, it was just something you didn't discuss. Nobody questioned, do you go to Mass on Sunday? That just wasn't an issue. We didn't question what the church taught. And had we been taught everything that the church teaches, we would have embraced it all, I'm sure.
Absolutely.
So it was, there was a crazy time. The 70s were kind of I was born in the early 60s, so the 70s, when I'm kind of becoming a little more than just a sentient being, I can start to think a little, and, it was such a crazy time.
Absolutely.
In which all these priests and nuns were leaving their vocations, and everything seemed to be up for grabs in terms of absolute truth, in terms of doctrine, moral theology. And, people want something to hold on to. They want to be grounded in something that's absolute. If you think, life is worth living.
Absolutely.
And if you believe that heaven exists.
Exactly.
Well, and there's also another option, too, if you don't get to heaven. So, these are realities. And I had to kind of find it out on my own. Mm-hmm. And it was very frustrating that, it was hard to get solid answers from priests. They were often very evasive. I found people didn't like to speak in absolute terms, and guys want to know absolutes.
Right, and also people. I think the 70s and 80s there was a lot of purposely placed questions. Like people were doubting things that were never in doubt. Like I remember once like a little bit jokingly, but a bishop told me that some people were asking him if the 10 Commandments were still there, and of course they are.
Yeah, they're around here someplace, I'm sure. Right. That's do they exist? Yeah, in your heart if you're living them. Right. And if not, there'll be consequences. These are choices. These are choices we make. And,
absolutely.
Nobody lives in a vacuum. Nobody lives in a vacuum. So, what you live, what you teach, the example you give, all of this has some resonance in the entire mystical body of Christ. And so, there is no private religion.
Absolutely.
And we all have a right to the truth. We all have a right to it.
Right. And God intentionally revealed what is necessary for our salvation. So we need to hold on to what God taught, and that is absolute truth.
And he gave it to very weak men, along with helping grace to make them, to help them carry out their mission. But he gave it to these men to pass it on faithfully.
Absolutely.
To pass it on faithfully. Faith comes from hearing, right? So if people aren't hearing it, they're not going to know it. Aristotle says there's nothing in the mind that wasn't first in the senses. So our Lord wants us to speak the truth. He wants He wants others to hear it. He wants us also to be examples of it. And so this is all. Nothing is really lost on our Lord.
Right.
And things are not unimportant.
Right. So then you were saying, when you were a child, many of these things were not taught. And then what happened? So how did now you're a priest, so something happened along the way that was good, that some good influence occurred, and someone helped you to, somehow find the truth.
Yes, I was fortunate to go to the high school seminary for my Archdiocese, Chicago.
Wonderful.
And I think the level of courses there was pretty good. And at college, I went to college, Gonzaga, where it was a mixed bag.
The Zags.
Yeah.
Go Zags.
Yeah, they weren't much of a sporting phenomenon while I was there, probably because I was there. But whatever the case, I wasn't I loved playing rugby. I wasn't that good at it. But the intellectually, it was a mixed bag. We had a couple of priests and a couple of professors who were great philosophers. Theology department was a little, it was
shaky,
wanting, shall we say. And nonetheless, there were some very solid men. And I remember in history, reading the history of the early church, studying history of the early church. And it was funny. It was through history classes, going through primary sources, that I'm discovering what the church teaches, and also looking at the heresies of that the councils were dealing with. And I go, wait a minute, I was taught that heresy as if it were true.
Right.
And so it was actually through history that I came to understand our faith with a little bit more depth. And then, rather than so it wasn't just doctrinal. A big moment came for me the end of my time in college. I was trying to help a friend who was a bit of a lapsed Catholic. I was trying to help him come back to the faith. And since I am, part Scottish and therefore very cheap, I thought I'd bring him to a used bookstore because I didn't want to buy him a new book. I brought him to a used bookstore and I said, I'm gonna go find you something that'll help you grow in your faith. And what I found for myself, I don't remember what book I found for him, but what I found for myself was this intriguing book called The Ascent of Mount Carmel by St. John of the Cross. And I read that in a couple of nights, and that was a cold shower. I got slapped around spiritually by him, and I realized that, this is not a game. The spiritual organism is real. This is how it works, and I have to deny myself. I have to be a man of prayer. I have to be a man of penance. If anything is going to be done, if I'm going to live this life, I was dabbling in the idea of the vocation. I told God, I'll put you on hold. I'll wait. And I joined the Marine Corps, and I got injured, and I was out of the Marine Corps. And okay, I guess after college, I'll go to the seminary. And that this book really put me aright, so I've held on to John of the Cross. And as a result, Teresa of Avila as well. It really kind of sure guides for the spiritual life. And I don't think there's any spiritual theologian that has written with the depth and the organization and the system as John of the Cross. He, for me, is the perfect marriage of scholastic thought with experiential, as John Paul II would say in Novum Millennio Ineunte, lived theology, right? The lived theology of the saints. John of the Cross is really the master, as far as I'm concerned.
Wonderful. Very good. So, and then finally, that's where your discernment came to a more specific, let's say, realization. You entered the seminary, and then you began writing at some point.
I discovered the great treasury of mental prayer before I entered the seminary, and then in the seminary with regular times of adoration and learning there's a book I would really recommend to your listeners.
Absolutely.
Called and it's not even a book. It's probably, if you're really cheap like me, you can get it for free online. It's a PDF. Called The Practice of the Presence of God by Brother Lawrence of the Resurrection.
Absolutely. Great
Carmelite friar. Well, learning that practice of the presence of God, which is basically living a recollected life, right? Living habitually aware that you are in God's loving presence. He's looking at you with a loving gaze, and we return that loving gaze with our heart and our mind in the midst of all of our doings, right?
Absolutely.
All of our work and our tasks and our recreation, and we're doing it with him. You know, when I describe that to young people, I say, you know, you see a movie when you're alone, or you see it with a friend. You enjoy it more when you're with a friend, even though you're not speaking.
Right.
But you enjoy it because there's a certain unspoken communication. That's what I'm talking about. And that's, I think, what Lawrence of the Resurrection was talking about. You know, in other words, we're with this friend, and he loves us, he sees us, and we just return the loving gaze throughout the day. And that can be done all day long. So, yeah, those were two things that were really transformative. And to answer your question, I thought I would like to write a book on prayer someday. And that was really my first goal. I want to write a book on prayer and teach people to do mental prayer. Well, it didn't quite happen as I had hoped or I planned. Years later, when I was doing my STL, the licentiate in theology, in philosophy, I was thinking, you know, these things that we study in philosophy, they're not useless. They have very practical applications. Absolutely. And so I took the most salient themes from my philosophy studies and wrote this book called Common Nonsense. And it's called Common Nonsense because it regards these fallacies that we hear. So, right, you can never be sure. There is no truth.
Right. Let me put a footnote there. Fallacies. So I know what is a fallacy, but just to double check, just to confirm, and to explain to those who are listening, a fallacy would be an argumentation, right? A reasoning that seems to be correct, but is actually incorrect.
Exactly.
Right? And it sounds like it's right by the way it is proposed, by the syllogism that seems to be correct, and therefore the conclusion, we draw the conclusion and say, oh, that's the conclusion. And the conclusion, not only sometimes it's actually wrong, but also the process it took to get to that conclusion, it's faulty.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah, there are some errors along the way. And as you know, Aristotle says that a small error in the beginning ends up with a big error at the end. And so, correct. Yeah, so somewhere along the line, there is something that is not quite right, and so the result is not right. And so these fallacies are often commonly held and repeated, but often not really thought through. So I thought, you know, the greatest philosopher ever, St. Thomas Aquinas, he has a Summa Theologica, you know, and he has this question. He lays out the problem. He gives a couple of reasons supporting the one position, and then he has a one-line response that rebuts the problem, and then he addresses all of the argumentation that was pro. And so he dismantles these problems. And in a certain sense, I followed his structure. Mm-hmm. So I start with a statement, there is no absolute truth, you know, for example.
So that's one of the things.
That's one of the chapters.
And also this is, by the way, is helpful for college students because I think these errors or fallacies or misguided argumentations are addressed to students. And many times college students that are Catholic, they come with a, I would say, naive faith or a faith that does not have a strong foundation.
Much like I did in college,
correct.
Right?
And myself too.
Right.
Like most students that get to college that are Catholic or call themselves Catholics, right? We get to college and we encounter these professors with authority that they present these truths that are half-truths, and then we fall for those half-truths and lose our faith. And that's why I think it's good to address these things.
Yes, we fall for it, or we know it's not right, but we don't have the tools to rebut it.
Right.
That's the idea. And so these are mostly fallacies that people hear. They kind of know that can't be true.
Right.
It can't be so, but I don't know what to say to it. And so I wanted to arm, college students with the argumentations for their own formation, but not just to win arguments. Above all, so that they can be sure in the truth
Right.
And these aren't anything. This is nothing that I've invented, right?
Right. Of course.
I kind of, I added some funny anecdotes and things like that to make the medicine taste good. And this book is basically written for somebody who normally would not read a philosophy book. If you like to read philosophy books, I'm sure there are better ones. This one is for people that would normally not read one, and nonetheless, you get the philosophical,
Absolutely.
you get the tools, right? The intellectual tools.
The title would be Common Nonsense, 25 Fallacies About Life Refuted.
Correct.
So why don't you tell us 2 or 3 to give us a good foundation?
The shortest chapter, I can tell you, I've got it memorized, right?
The
fallacy number 4, I believe, was... now, you're asking me about this book that I wrote. I wrote it in 1997,
Wow.
and I worked on it. I started in 97, and I worked on it for 10 years, published it in 2007, and so,
It's back there.
trying to remember now. I remember, but I do have chapter 4 memorized, and the fallacy was there is no truth. And the answer is, well, then your statement can't be true.
Absolutely.
So that was that. And then he just turned the page to chapter 5. And
right, because
there's nothing more to say. There's
Right.
nothing more to discuss. If there is no absolute truth, our communication is useless because
Right.
I don't know what your words mean. They're just sounds, right?
Right.
And notice, too, that often the enemies of absolutes are so absolutist in their imposition
Right.
of rules
Right.
that they've come up with. And notice, too, that they don't question whether there's a semi coming down the road.
Right.
Right? They don't question. They get out of the way. They get out of the way. Right? There's no question about that. They understand there's something absolute about getting run over by a truck. Okay? That's pretty
Right.
absolute. So they relegate this relativism merely to a couple of moral points.
Right.
Okay, so they're not even intellectually honest. And it's impossible to be intellectually honest if you say that you can't know the truth.
Right.
It's impossible.
Right. I remember once an anecdote. This is an anecdote. In 2018, I went to Jerusalem to preach a retreat. Anyway, I was in the old city of Jerusalem, staying for a day or two, and I wanted to go to Bethlehem. So I took a bus, public transportation, and there were students. I mean, there was a lot of people, but there was one student that happened to be sitting next to me, a Muslim student, who was going to a university in Bethlehem, where I was going. I was going to Bethlehem, not to the university. But I was surprised that he was going to a university, and he told me that he was studying even some Christian authors, right? But he told me that the one thing he was learning in his philosophy classes was that there is no absolute truth. Exactly this point, right? So I told him, well, by the way, between Jerusalem and Bethlehem, there's a
little
border
hurdle
check.
there to get over, yeah.
Right, there's a border check.
Right.
And the Israeli soldiers come into the bus with their guns, like with the AR-16, like brandishing it right in front of your face. So it's very, very intimidating. I had to experience it, and it was I never saw a machine gun that close to me, and sometimes they're pointing it at you, right? Of course, they're not going to shoot unless you do something wrong. So I told this young man, look.
Yeah, it's not the time to say Allahu Akbar.
Right. Right. And also, the other thing is, if there is no truth, right, he was like Hegel, right, questioning whether the things we see are real or is a construction of our mind.
Right.
Right? And it's a philosophical principle. And I said, look, when that Israeli soldier comes in with a machine gun, is there any question? Does anybody in this bus question that machine gun is true? No, absolutely. It's obvious. It's true. And you better stay put in your seat and not move because that machine gun is real. There's not a construction of your mind. And nobody even dares to question that at that point. When we're in our desk, sitting far away from the machine gun, and we have the possibility to think about and theorize, maybe we start thinking, maybe it's a construction of the mind. But when you're faced with the reality is it imposes of itself, right?
Yep.
In itself. So
it does impose itself.
Right.
And, think of people who say, I saw this guy the other day driving past me, and he had a bumper sticker said, "No gods, no masters." And I thought, actually, you do got a couple of masters and a couple of false gods, I'm sure.
Mm-hmm.
And some of them are probably your passions.
Right.
Okay, that lead you. You serve them. You serve your passions. They don't serve God's purposes, and therefore they don't serve you. Everybody serves someone. We all
Absolutely.
serve someone. And ultimately, our service to Jesus Christ is the only one that's worthwhile. But I don't even know why I brought that up. I was about to make some brilliant remark, and that was my segue, and now I forgot the brilliant remark. I'm sure it'll occur to me around midnight tonight.
It was all about the truth, the fallacy that there is no truth. Now,
that's what I was. Thank
right.
you for that. Yeah, because I was going to say reality imposes itself on us, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't follow any laws. Well, there's a law of gravity that you didn't vote for,
right?
Okay, so you can say, along with Barclay, you can say that you don't have to obey any laws, and that they're all false constructs, right? But jump out the window and see how it goes for you. You won't break the law. The law will break you, okay, when you hit the ground.
Well, Father, let's do this. Let's call it an episode today so that we can keep these episodes to around or less than 30 minutes. And let's continue talking next episode about one of your other books, the one on magic, entitled The Trouble with Magic. So thank you, everyone, for joining us today. I hope you liked hearing about Father Ermatinger's story and a little about the book, Common Nonsense, 25 Fallacies About Life, especially this about absolute truth and the importance of truth. If you would like to send me your comments or ask me any question, please do send me an email at info@forcollegecatholics.org. I'd love to hear from you. And make sure you join us next episode to listen more from Father Ermatinger. We'll see you next time.